The Garden City is the starting point for one family's incredible military service that spans generations. It was 1914, and the world was at war. Young men from across the country joined the fight, including 6 that shared the same family name, Adie.
I look at the different things that happened in the Adie family that they did. It's real easy for me to remember my father and grandfather's commitments a little harder going back to World War I, the Great War, because there's limited information available.
Of the 6 Adie boys who enlisted to fight the Great War, only Robert Adie and Scott's grandfather, James Donald Adie, returned home. Lieutenant John McClellan Adie, Lieutenant Harry Morton Ellis Adie, Private Archibald William Adie, and Gunner Allen Adie. All perished in the war.
I can't imagine such a significant loss as that. 3 sons and a cousin in the case of John, or my grandfather, his brother, and 3 cousins. I can't imagine the significance of how you would deal with losing so much.
Plaques that honor the fallen Adie soldiers have been installed here at Knox Presbyterian Church and across the street at City Hall. For James Donald Adie, moving on from the loss of 1 brother and 3 cousins meant moving away.
Just the proximity of all of that was a constant reminder and a constant grind on his and my grandmother's life going forward. So I tend to think that that's a big part of why they came down here.
James and his wife Karma settled in Southern California and raised a son, until once again the world was at war and another Adie answered the call. James Adie gave this letter to his son Harry as he left to serve his country.
When you get a bit low mentally, try to think back on the grand times we have all had together.
Harry Morton Adie, named after his dad's brother who died in World War I, was off to fight in Europe as a member of the U.S. Air Force.
He was a top turret gunner on the B-24s, and on one of their flights, the flak had knocked the canopy off of the B-24. When they landed back in England, they had to undo the handles on his .50 caliber machine gun and lift him out of the top of the plane because he was frozen to it. He couldn't move. He couldn't get out. His hands were frozen to the gun. And he said they took him in to a hospital, and they had a bathtub full of ice and water. And he said he didn't want to go down in there. He was scared to death to be put in that cold water. And when they dropped him in there, he said it burned like fire.
Harry Adie returned home safely from the war. He would then get married, help raise 5 children, and become a successful businessman. Years later, America was at war in Vietnam, and a family that had given far more than their share was once again asked to serve. Scott got the news over the phone from his dad, who said,
"You got a letter today," and I knew exactly what he meant. It was my draft notice. I didn't feel any compulsion to resist that at all. I felt scared. I felt worried about my future, but it was like, you're an Adie. This is what you do. You go when you're called. You answer your country's need. I didn't understand what was going on in Vietnam. I just knew that my country wanted me to go, wanted me to serve. And so I did.
After basic training, Scott joined the U.S. Army 1st Cavalry Division as a machine gunner. He described his time in Vietnam as brutal. It would culminate in a fierce firefight in March of 1969 that would change his life.
And we immediately took casualties, and as we were pulling out of the wood line, following along behind me was another infantryman named Richard Griego. Richard was carrying an M16. He was a rifleman. I was carrying the M60 machine gun. They fired a B-40 rocket, and it hit right next to Richard Griego. I managed to get away unscathed. I got about 10, 15 yards away from Richard Griego, and I hit the ground, and I turned around, and Richard was laying on the ground, and he was waving like this, and he was bleeding out. He died. I still credit him for the fact that I'm here today. Whatever pleasure I have in life, I owe to him.
Scott shared the story of that fateful day when he met the Griegos 50 years later. Until then, they had no idea of the circumstances surrounding Richard's death. The wisdom Scott has gained from his family's incredible story is this: we honor those we have lost by the way we live on.
The cost is always too high. If it's somebody you know and love, somebody you care about, it's always too high. But as you move through your life and you get older, and the sorrow and pain of the loss is diminished, you begin to live out the same things that they died for. And that's what we need to remember during Armistice Day, Remembrance Day, Veterans Day here. We need to remember that we're living with the freedoms and liberties we have because of those sacrifices.